In the months before it collapsed, the men running Enron were quietly selling their own stock. One of them, the CEO, sold around $33 million worth. And at the same time, the very same months, they were telling their own employees the opposite. Keep buying. Hold. This stock is going to the moon. Roughly 20,000 people believed them, because why wouldn't you? This was Enron. Fortune magazine had just named it the most innovative company in America for the 6th year in a row. By the end, the stock those employees were told to hold went from $90.75 to 26 cents. Their retirement savings, over $1 billion of it, simply evaporated. And the company itself, valued at roughly $70 billion, filed the largest bankruptcy in American history up to that point. Here's the question this whole story turns on: how does a company that big, that admired, that closely watched by regulators and auditors and Wall Street analysts, turn out to be almost entirely fake, without any of them stopping it? Follow the money. To understand the fraud, you have to understand the reinvention that made it possible. Enron was born in 1985, and it was born boring. It came out of a merger between Houston Natural Gas and a pipeline company called InterNorth, two utilities in the least glamorous business imaginable, moving natural gas through steel pipes buried in the ground. A man named Kenneth Lay became its chief executive. And pipelines, whatever else you say about them, are real. They are physical assets. You can walk out and touch them. But real, physical, boring assets grow slowly. And in the 1990s, Wall Street didn't reward slow. It rewarded growth, reinvention, the future. So Enron hired a McKinsey consultant named Jeffrey Skilling, and Skilling brought an idea that would transform the company and eventually detonate it. Skilling's vision was that Enron shouldn't just own pipelines. It should become a kind of stock market for energy itself, a middleman, a trader, buying and selling contracts for gas and electricity the way a bank trades bonds. In his words, Enron would go asset light. Own less of the boring physical stuff, trade more of the paper. And Wall Street loved it, because a fast-moving trading company gets valued far more richly than a stodgy utility. The stock began to climb. But to make that transformation work, Skilling needed to change one more thing, something that sounds technical and is, in fact, the beating heart of everything that went wrong. He needed to change how Enron was allowed to count its money. Normally, a company records profit as it actually earns it. You sign a deal, you deliver the goods over the years, and each year you book that year's real income. It's slow, but it's honest. Skilling wanted something called mark-to-market accounting. And in January of 1992, the SEC, the government regulator whose entire job is to police this, approved it for Enron. Here's what it meant in practice. Enron could sign a 20-year contract to supply energy, estimate how much profit the deal would generate over its entire life, and then book all of that projected future profit immediately, as if it had already arrived. Not the cash. The prediction. A deal that hadn't earned a single dollar yet could be reported today as a mountain of income, based entirely on Enron's own guess about the future. Sit with what that does to a company. Once you've already reported this year's profits based on the next 20 years, how do you show growth next year? You've spent the future. The only way to keep the numbers climbing is to sign an even bigger deal, book an even bigger projection, and do it again. And again. Mark-to-market accounting didn't just let Enron exaggerate. It forced Enron onto a treadmill where it had to invent ever larger fantasies of future profit just to stand still. And for a while, it worked beautifully. On paper, Enron was unstoppable. Revenues that reached, on paper, around $100 billion a year. It expanded into trading everything: electricity, broadband internet capacity, even the weather. Fortune named it America's most innovative company in 1996, and again in 1997, and it kept winning that title for 6 straight years. Business schools taught Enron as a case study in brilliance. the stock kept climbing toward its peak of $90.75. But projections are not cash. And underneath the beautiful numbers, the real deals were losing real money, and real debt was piling up. If that debt ever appeared on Enron's balance sheet, the whole illusion of a lean, fast-growing trading company would shatter. So Enron's chief financial officer, a man named Andrew Fastow, built the machine that hid it. Fastow created a web of shell companies, partnerships with names like Chuco, LJM, and the Raptors. And Enron used them to perform a magic trick. It would take its failing assets and its growing debts and sell them to these partnerships, so they'd vanish from Enron's own books. The debt was still there, it just lived somewhere the shareholders couldn't see it. On the surface, Enron looked lean and profitable. Underneath, it was drowning. But here's the flaw buried inside the trick, the seed that guarantees the ending. Many of these hidden partnerships were propped up using Enron's own stock as collateral. The entire structure only held together as long as Enron's share price stayed high. Enron had built a machine to hide its losses, and wired that machine to the one thing it could not control forever, its own stock price. The moment the market lost faith, the hedges would collapse, and every loss they'd hidden would come flooding back all at once. In February 2001, Jeffrey Skilling, the architect of the whole reinvention, finally became chief executive of Enron. It was the top of the mountain. 6 months later, he abruptly quit. August 2001, he resigned, citing personal reasons. The man who built the machine walked away from the controls just as it was about to fly apart, and in the months around his exit, he'd sold tens of millions of dollars of his own stock. That same month, an Enron vice president named Sharon Watkins sent a private memo to Ken Lay. Her warning was blunt. She wrote that she was incredibly nervous that we will implode in a wave of accounting scandals. She had looked at the partnerships and seen exactly what they were. Inside the company, someone knew. Then the illusion met daylight. On October 16, 2001, Enron reported a shock quarterly loss of $618 million and disclosed that it was wiping out over $1 billion of shareholder value tied to Fastow's partnerships. 6 days later, the SEC opened an investigation. Once regulators started pulling on the thread, the hidden debt began pouring out into the open. Enron was forced to admit that years of its reported profits had never really existed, and restated its earnings going back to 1997. Now the fatal flaw did exactly what it was designed to do. As the truth came out, the stock fell. As the stock fell, the partnerships propped up by that stock collapsed. As they collapsed, more hidden losses surfaced, which drove the stock down further, which collapsed more partnerships. The machine ran in reverse, and it ran fast. A rival, Dingy, briefly agreed to buy the wreckage for around $8 billion. But on November 28, the credit agencies cut Enron's debt to junk status, and Dingy walked away, both on the same day. That was the end. With its credit gone and its rescue dead, Enron had nothing left. On December 2, 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy. $63.4 billion in assets, the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history at the time. Around 4,000 employees were let go in the first days, most of the rest to follow, many of them watching their retirement savings, roughly $1 billion of Enron stock inside their 401(k)s, collapsed to almost nothing. And the damage didn't stop at Enron's walls. Its auditor, Arthur Andersen, one of the 5 biggest accounting firms in the world, 85,000 employees, had signed off on the books and shredded documents as the investigators closed in. It was convicted of obstruction of justice in 2002 and effectively destroyed. 85,000 people, at a company founded in the 1910s, gone. Years later, in 2005, the Supreme Court would actually overturn that conviction, but it didn't matter. The firm was already dead. The blast radius was total. So who's to blame? The easy answer is the villains, Skilling, who went to prison, Lay, convicted before he died, Fasto, who built the shells and then testified against everyone. And yes, they lied, and they knew it. But if you stop there, you've missed the actual warning of Enron, and it's a far more uncomfortable one. Because look at what the machine was built out of. The accounting method at the core of it wasn't smuggled in, it was approved by the SEC. The books weren't hidden from the auditors signed them. The fraud wasn't happening in the shadows away from Wall Street's eyes, it was happening in the single most celebrated company in America, the one the business press called the most innovative in the country 6 years running, the one taught in business schools, the one analysts rated a buy almost to the very end. Every single institution we built to catch this kind of thing, the regulator, the auditor, the analysts, the financial press, looked directly at Enron for years and saw a masterpiece. That's the part that should keep you up at night. Enron's fraud didn't succeed by evading the gatekeepers. It succeeded by being admired by them. The lie wasn't hiding in the basement. It was on the cover of the magazine. And that's the pattern to remember, because it never really goes away. The most dangerous frauds are almost never the ones that look like crimes. They're the ones that look like genius, celebrated, awarded, endorsed by all the right people, right up until the moment there's nothing underneath at all. A company everyone called the future, hollow at the center, applauded all the way down. If that pattern sounds familiar, we told another version of it, a Silicon Valley darling worth $9 billion whose miracle product never actually worked. That one's one click away. Follow the money.